Everyone feared the Hell's Angel leader. But she married him and discovered a heartbreaking truth. A gentle young woman thought she was marrying the most dangerous biker in the state. A man people whispered about. A man nobody dared look in the eye. But on their wedding night, everything she believed shatters. Because the man the world fears isn't who he says he is at all. He's been trapped undercover for 8 long years, pretending to be a monster just to stay alive. And the real leader, the real danger, is holding someone he loves hostage. Worse, her marriage may have exposed them both. Now the gang is circling, shadows are closing in, and every second could be their last. What happens when the man everyone fears is actually the one who needs saving most? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the community center's parking lot as June Parker gathered her belongings after another fulfilling day of counseling. She loved her work with troubled teens, even on the most challenging days. Today had been especially rewarding. Watching 17-year-old Marco finally open up about his struggles at home had reminded her why she chose this path. June tucked a strand of brown hair behind her ear as she sorted through the day's paperwork. Her desk calendar showed a full week ahead of one-on-one sessions and group activities. The familiar scent of coffee and worn carpeting filled her small office as she packed her worn leather messenger bag. "Heading out, June?" called Mrs. Rodriguez, the center's secretary, from the front desk. "It's getting late." "Just finished up," June replied with a warm smile. "Marco made real progress today." "You have such a gift with these kids," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her eyes crinkling with affection. "But please be careful driving home. You know how dangerous that highway gets after dark?" June nodded, though she wasn't too worried. She'd driven this route hundreds of times in her reliable old Toyota sedan. The desert highway connecting the community center to her small house on the outskirts of town had become as familiar as an old friend. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon as June pulled out of the parking lot. The Arizona heat still lingered, making the air shimmer above the asphalt. She rolled down her windows, letting the warm breeze ruffle her hair as she hummed along to the radio. About 15 minutes into her drive home, the first sign of trouble appeared. The engine made an unusual clicking sound, followed by a concerning sputter. June's heart skipped a beat as her car began to lose power. "No, no, no," she muttered, guiding the failing vehicle to the shoulder of the road. The engine gave one final cough before dying completely. June sat for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel. The silence felt oppressive after the familiar purr of the engine. She checked her phone. Only 1 bar of service, of course. Taking a deep breath, she popped the hood and stepped out onto the gravel shoulder. The setting sun painted the desert landscape in shades of orange and purple, beautiful but increasingly threatening as darkness crept in. June propped open the hood, though she knew her knowledge of car mechanics was limited at best. That's when she heard it, a deep, thundering rumble in the distance, growing louder by the second. June's breath caught in her throat as she turned toward the sound. A massive black motorcycle appeared around the bend, its chrome pipes gleaming in the fading light. The rider was a formidable figure, broad-shouldered and muscular beneath a worn leather vest. Even from a distance, she could make out the distinctive Hell's Angels insignia. Every instinct told June to get back in her car and lock the doors. Everyone in town knew about the Hell's Angels' presence in the area, and their leader, known only as Ghost, was particularly feared. Yet something made her stay where she was, watching as the motorcycle slowed and pulled onto the shoulder behind her car. The rider cut the engine, and the sudden silence felt electric. He swung off the bike with fluid grace that seemed at odds with his intimidating size. As he approached, June could see why they called him Ghost. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, with pale eyes that seemed to look right through her. A jagged scar ran along his jaw, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. But there was something else in those eyes, something that made June's counselor instincts prickle. Behind the cold facade, she glimpsed a flicker of… what? Pain? Exhaustion? Whatever it was, it didn't match his fearsome reputation. Having trouble? His voice was low and rough, like gravel under tires. June straightened her shoulders, surprised by her own calm. Yes, the engine just died on me. Ghost moved past her to examine the engine compartment, his movements precise and controlled. He studied the components for a moment before reaching in to check something near the battery. "Loose cable," he said simply, his hands working with surprising dexterity to secure the connection. "Should start now." June watched him work, noting how he kept himself carefully angled to maintain awareness of his surroundings, a habit that spoke of someone accustomed to watching their back. "Thank you," she said softly when he finished. "I'm June Parker. I work at the community center in town." Ghost wiped his hands on a bandana from his pocket, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be out here alone after dark," he said, ignoring her introduction. "This road isn't safe at night." There was something in his tone. Not a threat, but a genuine warning. June felt a chill despite the lingering heat. "I usually head home earlier," she explained. "Had a breakthrough with one of my kids today, lost track of time." For just a moment, something flickered in Ghost's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. But it vanished so quickly June wasn't sure she'd seen it at all. "Try it now," he said, stepping back from the car. June slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine started immediately, purring as if it had never had a problem. Relief flooded through her. She got out to thank him properly, but Ghost was already walking back to his motorcycle. The sun had nearly set now, casting long shadows across the empty highway. "Ghost!" she called out, surprising herself with her boldness. He paused, half turning toward her. "Thank you. Really." He stood there for a moment, tension visible in his shoulders. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible above the desert wind. "Stay safe, June Parker." The motorcycle roared to life, and Ghost melted into the gathering darkness like his namesake. June watched until his taillights disappeared around a bend, her heart racing with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Back in her car, hands slightly shaking on the steering wheel, June replayed the encounter in her mind. She'd spent years learning to read people, to see past their defenses to the truth underneath. And something about Ghost, the careful way he moved, the warning in his words, that brief flash of humanity in his eyes, told her there was more to him than the terrifying reputation that preceded him. The rest of her drive home passed in a blur of thoughts and questions. By the time June pulled into her driveway, the stars were out, diamond bright in the desert sky. She sat in her car for a long moment, still feeling the lingering impact of those pale, haunted eyes. Something had shifted in her world, though she couldn't say exactly what. All she knew was that she'd seen something in the feared leader of the Hells Angels that no one else seemed to notice. A glimpse of a soul in pain, hidden behind walls of leather and steel. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the community center's break room as June stirred her coffee, lost in thought about the previous night's encounter. Her co-worker, Sarah, noticed her distant expression. "Earth to June." Sarah waved her hand in front of June's face. "You've been stirring that coffee for 5 minutes straight." June blinked, coming back to the present. "Sorry, I just had the strangest experience last night. You know that biker everyone's afraid of? Ghost? Sarah's eyes widened. The Hells Angels leader? June, please tell me you didn't. My car broke down on Highway 16, June explained. He stopped to help. Fixed it, actually. And Sarah, he wasn't anything like what people say. June Parker, eternal optimist, Sarah shook her head. Always seeing the good in everyone, even notorious gang leaders. I'm serious, June insisted. There was something different about him. Something sad, almost. Sarah patted her hand. Just be careful with that big heart of yours, okay? 2 days later, June stood in the community center's field, clipboard in hand, as she watched her group of teens attempt a trust fall exercise. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of desert sage. Remember, she called out, communication is key. Tommy, make sure you're… Her words cut off as the teens suddenly went silent. One by one, they turned to stare at something behind her. June felt the shift in energy before she even turned around. Ghost stood at the edge of the field, his black motorcycle parked nearby. The teens scattered like startled birds, retreating to what they deemed a safe distance. But June noticed Ghost made no move to approach, instead waiting patiently at the field's periphery. Taking a deep breath, June walked toward him. Up close, she could see he was holding something small and colorful in his hand. One of your kids dropped this, he said quietly, holding out a friendship bracelet made of worn threads. The night your car broke down. June recognized it immediately. That's Maria's. She was so upset about losing it. She accepted the bracelet, their fingers brushing briefly. You came all this way to return it? A hint of a smile touched his lips. Seemed important. Over the next few weeks, Ghost became an unexpected constant in June's life. She'd spot him through the window of the Daily Grind, her favorite coffee shop, always sitting at the same corner table. Sometimes he'd be outside the community center when she left work, offering her a ride home when her car made suspicious noises. At first, people warned her. The other counselors, her friends, even some of her teens expressed concern. But June couldn't explain the sense of safety she felt in his presence, the way his careful actions spoke louder than his intimidating appearance. One afternoon, she found him waiting by his bike after a particularly challenging day with her teens. Rough day? He asked, noting her tired expression. June managed a small smile. Is it that obvious? Your shoulders always tense up when you're stressed. The observation surprised her. She hadn't realized he'd been paying such close attention. Want to talk about it? He offered, then added with unexpected humor. I've been told I'm a good listener, probably because I don't talk much. June laughed, and the sound seemed to transform his face, softening the hard lines around his eyes. The community fair arrived with the first cool evenings of fall. String lights crisscrossed overhead, casting warm pools of light across the town square. June wandered between the booths, taking in the familiar sights and smells of kettle corn and apple cider. She felt his presence before she saw him, turning to find Ghost standing in the shadow of an oak tree. He looked almost vulnerable there, as if unsure of his place in such a normal, happy scene. June walked over to him, holding out a paper cup. Hot chocolate? He accepted it with a slight smile. How did you know? Lucky guess, she shrugged, but they both knew it was more than that. Over the weeks, they developed an understanding that went beyond words. They walked together through the fair, Ghost's imposing presence creating a bubble of space around them. But June noticed how gently he moved through the crowd, always careful not to frighten anyone. Near the edge of the square, where the string lights cast their softest glow, Ghost stopped walking. June, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I need to tell you something. She turned to face him, waiting. "In all my years here," he continued, "you're the first person who's ever looked me in the eye without flinching. The first one who's spoken to me without fear." His hand reached up, hesitating before brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" June leaned into his touch. "Because I see you," she whispered. "Not the person everyone thinks you are, but who you really are." The kiss, when it came, was gentle, a stark contrast to his tough exterior. June felt years of loneliness in that kiss, years of keeping people at arm's length. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and for once, Ghost didn't seem to care who was watching. That kiss opened a floodgate. Suddenly, their lives were filled with shared moments, midnight rides through the desert, Ghost teaching June about motorcycle maintenance, long conversations under starlit skies. He showed her hidden canyons and secret waterfalls, places where the desert bloomed despite all odds. Late one night, sitting on the hood of her car at their favorite lookout point, Ghost actually laughed at one of her jokes. A real, uninhibited laugh that echoed off the canyon walls. June memorized the sound, tucked it away like a precious gift. Their romance blossomed in these quiet moments, in the spaces between who they were supposed to be and who they really were. June discovered that beneath his hardened exterior, Ghost had a dry wit and a gentle heart. He found in her someone who could see past his fearsome reputation to the man underneath. The town's whispers continued, but June paid them no mind. She knew a truth they didn't, that sometimes the most beautiful things grew in the most unexpected places, like desert flowers pushing through cracks in the rocks. The desert sun had barely set when Ghost pulled up to June's house on his motorcycle. His usual confidence seemed different tonight. There was an electric energy about him, a nervous anticipation that made June's heart flutter. "I want to show you something," he said softly, holding out the spare helmet. His voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. June climbed onto the bike behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. The engine rumbled to life, and they rode into the deepening twilight. The familiar landscape of saguaros and red rocks took on an almost magical quality in the fading light. After about 40 minutes of riding, Ghost turned onto a narrow dirt road she'd never noticed before. In the distance, small adobe chapel emerged from the desert, its windows glowing with warm lantern light. June's breath caught in her throat at the unexpected beauty of it. Ghost parked the bike and helped her off, his hands lingering on her waist longer than necessary. The chapel keeper, an elderly man with kind eyes, greeted them from the doorway with a knowing smile. Inside, dozens of lanterns cast dancing shadows on the whitewashed walls. The simple wooden pews gleamed with years of careful polishing, and the small altar was adorned with fresh wildflowers. Ghost led June to the front of the chapel, his usual steady hands trembling slightly. When he turned to face her, the vulnerability in his eyes made her heart ache. "June," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been alone for so long, I forgot what it felt like to be whole." He took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. "These past weeks with you, you've shown me what life could be, what I could be." June reached out to touch his face, feeling the slight tremor in his jaw. Ghost leaned into her touch, closing his eyes briefly before continuing. "I know this seems fast," he said, "but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Slowly, he sank to one knee, looking up at her with a mixture of hope and fear. "June Parker, will you marry me? Tonight?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. June looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of doubt or hesitation. Instead, she found only sincerity and a depth of love that took her breath away. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, I will." The chapel keeper stepped forward, Bible in hand, his weathered face creased with joy. The ceremony was simple but profound, just the three of them in the lantern-lit chapel, with the desert night pressing against the windows and the soft sound of wind through the nearby Joshua trees. They exchanged simple silver rings that Ghost had somehow acquired, their voices steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm them. When the chapel keeper pronounced them husband and wife, Ghost's kiss was both tender and desperate, as if he couldn't quite believe this moment was real. The ride back to June's house was different from any they'd shared before. She held onto him tightly, their left hands clasped together whenever the road allowed it, their matching rings catching the starlight. The desert air was warm and sweet with night-blooming flowers, and June felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. At home, they ordered Chinese food, a mundane detail that somehow made everything feel more real. They sat at June's small kitchen table, stealing glances at each other between bites of kung pao chicken and fried rice. Ghost kept touching his ring as if to confirm it was still there, and June couldn't stop smiling, even as she noticed his mood beginning to shift. As they finished eating, Ghost grew increasingly quiet. The easy happiness of earlier gave way to a tension that seemed to radiate from his shoulders. He pushed his food around his plate, lost in thought, his jaw clenched tight. Finally, he stood abruptly. "I need some air," he said, his voice rough. He walked out to the small backyard, leaving June concerned and confused. After giving him a few moments alone, June followed him outside. The desert wind had picked up, carrying the scent of sage and creosote. Ghost stood with his back to her, his hands gripping the porch railing so tightly his knuckles were white. "Talk to me," June said softly, placing her hand on his back. She could feel him trembling beneath her touch. Ghost turned to face her, and in the dim porch light, she could see the torment in his expression. "June," he began, his voice breaking slightly. "There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you before all of this." He gestured vaguely at their rings. The wind picked up, stirring June's hair as she waited patiently for him to continue. Ghost seemed to be fighting an internal battle, his face a mask of guilt and fear. "I'm not," he started, then stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "The man you think I am. It's not." He took a shuddering breath, and June could see how much this confession was costing him. The warm desert wind carried his words across the space between them, heavy with the weight of secrets long kept. June stood steady, ready to hear whatever truth he needed to share, her love for him evident in her patient silence. Ghost looked at her with such raw emotion that it made her heart clench. "June, I need you to know who I really am." Ghost drew in a shaky breath, his shoulders slumping as if a great weight pressed down on him. The porch light cast shadows across his face as he turned to June, his eyes filled with a pain she'd never seen before. "My real name is Daniel Hayes," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not who everyone thinks I am. He swallowed hard. "I'm a federal agent, have been for the past 8 years, working undercover in the Angels." June felt the world tilt slightly, but she kept her grip on his hands steady, encouraging him to continue. Ghost, Daniel, seemed to draw strength from her touch. "It wasn't supposed to be this long," he continued, running his thumb across his wedding ring. "Just a year, maybe 2, but I kept rising in the ranks, getting closer to the real power. Then everything changed." His voice cracked. "They took my sister, Lily. She was just 15, June's heart clenched. Who took her? Victor Kane. Everyone calls him Viper. He's the real leader of the Angels. I'm just his puppet, his front man. Daniel's hands began to shake. He keeps her hidden, moves her around, uses her to make sure I stay in line, play my part. If I step out of line... He couldn't finish the sentence. June moved closer, wrapping her arms around him. She could feel his heart pounding against her chest. How long ago? 3 years, he whispered. She'd be 18 now. I don't even know if she'd recognize me anymore. I barely recognize myself. He pulled back slightly, looking into June's eyes. I've done things, June. Terrible things. Had to maintain my cover, to keep Lily alive, to keep myself alive. You did what you had to do, June said softly, though her mind was reeling with this new reality. Daniel shook his head. I've been ghost for so long, sometimes I forget who Daniel Hayes was. The only time I feel real, feel human, is when I'm with you. They sat together in silence for a long moment, the desert wind rustling through the yard. June processed everything he'd told her, understanding now the haunted look she'd first seen in his eyes. 2 days later, the danger they both feared came calling. June was picking up groceries after work, pushing her cart down the cereal aisle, when a shadow fell across her path. One of the gang's enforcers, a hulking man with a snake tattoo crawling up his neck, stepped out from behind a display. Well, if it ain't the boss's weakness, he sneered, backing her against the shelves. His breath smelled of cigarettes and menace. June's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. I need to finish my shopping. The enforcer leaned closer. Funny thing about weaknesses, he said, his voice low and threatening. They never last long in our world. He smiled, showing yellowed teeth. Remember that, sweetheart. Then he was gone, leaving June trembling among the breakfast cereals. That evening, she told Daniel about the encounter. His reaction was immediate and intense. He began pacing her living room, running his hands through his hair in agitation. You have to leave town, he said, his voice urgent. Tonight. I can get you somewhere safe, set you up with a new identity. No, June said firmly, standing her ground. I'm not running. June, please, he begged. You don't understand what these people are capable of. I can't lose you too. She caught his hands in hers, stopping his pacing. I'm not leaving you, she insisted. We'll figure this out together. Later that night, June was at her desk, reviewing attendance logs from the youth center, a habit she'd developed to track the progress of her kids. Something caught her eye, making her heart skip a beat. She pulled out an old file, comparing dates and descriptions. A quiet girl who'd arrived at the center 3 months ago. Brown hair, green eyes, small scar above her right eyebrow. June had noticed how she kept to herself, how she seemed to flinch at loud noises. The girl matched Daniel's description of Lily perfectly. June's hands shook as she gathered the files. She drove home quickly, her mind racing with implications. Daniel was waiting on the porch, as if he'd sensed something was wrong. I need to show you something, she said, spreading the files on the kitchen table. This girl, she started coming to the center 3 months ago. Look at her description, Daniel. Look at her photo. Daniel's face went pale as he stared at the grainy security camera image. Lily, he whispered, touching the photo with trembling fingers. They've had her here all along. The reality of their situation crashed over them both. Their marriage, their love, it had inadvertently exposed them all. June watched as Daniel's expression shifted from joy at finding his sister to horror at understanding the danger they now faced. They must have been watching me, June realized. That's why they brought her to my program, to keep tabs on me even before we... Daniel nodded grimly. They've been playing us all along." He looked at June, his eyes full of fear and determination. "We have to get her out, both of you, before it's too late." The night deepened around them as they sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by files and fears, trying to figure out how to save not just themselves, but the young girl who had been silently reaching out for help all along. The morning sun had barely crept over the desert horizon when June's car pulled into the empty youth center parking lot. Ghost sat rigid in the passenger seat, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. The building looked different in the pre-dawn quiet, more imposing, more significant. This wasn't just another day at work for June. This was the moment everything would change. "Are you ready?" June asked softly, touching Ghost's arm. He nodded, unable to speak. The weight of 8 years of separation, of guilt and fear, pressed down on his shoulders. They entered through the side door, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. June's office was at the end of the corridor, bathed in the soft glow of early morning light. She unlocked the door with trembling fingers. "She usually comes early to help set up," June explained, switching on the lights. "She likes the quiet time before everyone else arrives." As if on cue, they heard the soft padding of footsteps in the hallway. Ghost's breath caught in his throat. A slender figure appeared in the doorway, a teenage girl with familiar green eyes and brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She froze when she saw them, her face draining of color. "Sarah," Ghost whispered, using her real name for the first time in years. His voice cracked with emotion. "Sarah Lily Hayes." The girl's eyes widened in recognition, then filled with tears. She took a step backward, glancing frantically down the hallway. "You can't be here," she whispered. "They'll know. They always know." June closed the door quietly behind them, creating a cocoon of safety in her small office. "It's okay, Lily," she said gently. "No one else is here yet. You're safe." Ghost took a hesitant step forward, his hands raised as if approaching a frightened animal. "I never stopped looking for you, Sarah. Every single day I tried to find a way to get you out." Lily's composure crumbled. She launched herself into her brother's arms, sobbing against his leather jacket. Ghost held her tightly, his own tears falling freely now. June watched the reunion with tears in her eyes, her heart aching for both of them. After several minutes, they settled into the chairs in June's office. Lily sat close to her brother, as if afraid he might disappear if she let go. Her story came out in broken pieces, punctuated by fresh waves of tears. "They moved me around a lot at first," she explained, twisting a tissue in her hands. "Different houses, different cities. Then they brought me here 3 months ago. They said..." She glanced at Ghost. "They said it was time for you to prove yourself. They wanted to use me to force you to do something terrible." Ghost's jaw clenched. "The initiation," he said darkly. "They were going to make me kill someone to become a full member." June felt sick to her stomach. She'd known the gang was dangerous, but hearing the casual cruelty of their plans made it real in a new way. "They put me in June's program to keep me isolated," Lily continued. "They have people watching all the time. If I tried to run or tell anyone..." She shuddered. Ghost leaned forward, taking his sister's hands in his. "I promise you, Sarah, they will never hurt you again, but we have to be smart about this." June moved to her desk, pulling out a notepad. "We need a plan," she said firmly. "Something they won't expect." They spent the next hour mapping out possibilities. Ghost contacted his federal handler, Agent Ross, through a secure line. The agent's voice was grim when he heard the situation. "I can have an extraction team ready in 48 hours, Ross said, "but you'll need to keep her hidden until then. They'll be watching all the usual places." She can stay with me, June offered, without hesitation. My house is on the outskirts of town, and no one would think to look there. Ghost started to protest, but June cut him off. I'm already involved, she reminded him. And they already see me as a threat. At least this way we can protect each other. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they finalized their plan. Lily would pretend to be sick and leave the center early. Instead of going to her assigned home, she would slip away to June's house. Ghost would maintain his normal routine to avoid suspicion, then join them after dark. That evening, June's small kitchen filled with unfamiliar but welcome sounds. The clatter of pots and pans, the sizzle of cooking food, quiet conversation, and occasional nervous laughter. She'd insisted on making a proper meal. Chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables. Things she imagined Lily hadn't had in years. Ghost positioned himself by the window, dividing his attention between watching the street and watching his sister help June in the kitchen. Lily seemed to relax slightly in the domestic setting, though she still startled at every unexpected noise. I used to cook with Mom, Lily said softly as she helped June peel carrots. Before everything, she made the best chocolate chip cookies. June smiled warmly. Maybe we can make some tomorrow, if you'd like. Lily's eyes lit up, making her look like the teenage girl she should have been all along. Really? Ghost watched the exchange from his post by the window, his throat tight with emotion. This was what he'd fought for all these years, the chance for his sister to have normal moments like this again. The simple joy of baking cookies, of feeling safe, of being part of a family. They ate dinner at June's small kitchen table, the food tasting better than anything Lily could remember. Ghost kept his gun close, but he allowed himself to relax enough to enjoy the meal. June told funny stories about her work at the center, carefully avoiding any mention of their current situation. For a brief time, they could almost pretend they were just a normal family having dinner together. After the dishes were cleared, they gathered in June's living room. The curtains were drawn tight, and Ghost had disabled the porch light to avoid casting shadows. Lily curled up on the couch between June and her brother, exhausted but unwilling to sleep. What happens after? She asked in a small voice. When the agents come? Ghost exchanged a look with June before answering. We'll go somewhere safe, he promised. Somewhere they can't find us. And when this is all over, we'll build a new life, together. June reached out and squeezed his hand, adding her silent promise to his. Outside, the desert night grew deeper, and somewhere in the darkness, danger waited. But in this moment, in the warm circle of June's living room, a fragile sense of family had begun to take root. The morning sun crept through June's kitchen window, casting warm patches across the tile floor. June stood at the counter, fixing breakfast while Lily sat curled in a chair, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of hot chocolate. Ghost paced near the back door, checking his phone every few minutes for updates from Agent Ross. You need to eat something, June said gently to Ghost, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs toward him. He shook his head, but she persisted. We all need to keep our strength up. Over the next 2 days, they fell into an uneasy routine. June went to work as usual, not wanting to raise suspicions. Ghost maintained his regular appearances around town, though every moment away from his sister filled him with anxiety. Lily stayed inside June's house, spending hours reading books from June's shelves or watching old movies with the volume turned low. In the evenings, June and Ghost would spread maps and documents across her kitchen table, planning escape routes and discussing contingencies. But Ghost grew increasingly withdrawn, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his past. I've done terrible things, he confessed one night, his voice barely above a whisper. Things I can't take back. To maintain my cover, I had to become someone else entirely. June reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. But that wasn't really you, she said firmly. The real you is still there. That evening, June had an idea. She was scheduled to deliver meals to elderly veterans in her program, something she did 3 times a week. Come with me, she suggested to Ghost. No one will expect to see you there. It might help to do something good. Ghost hesitated, but agreed. They loaded June's car with warm containers of food, leaving Lily secure in the house with emergency numbers and escape plans memorized. As they drove through the quiet streets, June explained about each veteran they would visit. Their first stop was at Mr. Henderson's small apartment. The elderly man's face lit up when he saw June, then looked curiously at Ghost, who hung back in the shadows. "This is my friend," June said simply. "He's helping me tonight." Mr. Henderson nodded, his wise eyes twinkling. "Well, any friend of June's is welcome here. These old bones appreciate the help." Throughout the evening, they visited 8 more veterans. Each time, Ghost stayed in the background, but June noticed how carefully he carried the food containers, how gently he spoke when addressed. At their last stop, Mrs. Rodriguez, a widow whose husband had served in Vietnam, actually made Ghost smile when she insisted on giving him a cookie she'd baked. "Such kind eyes," she said, patting his arm. "Reminds me of my James. He always said the eyes tell you everything about a person." On the drive back, Ghost was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence. "They don't know who I am," he said finally. "What I've done. They just accept the help." "Because that's who you really are," June replied softly. "Someone who helps others. The rest was just a role you had to play to protect Lily." Over the next few nights, Ghost continued joining June on her delivery rounds. The veterans began to talk about the mysterious volunteer who appeared with June, sharing stories about his gentleness with their arthritic hands, or how he fixed Mrs. Rodriguez's squeaky front door without being asked. Slowly, Ghost began to smile more, to laugh at the veterans' jokes, to relax into moments of genuine connection. June watched the transformation with quiet joy, seeing glimpses of the man he must have been before his undercover assignment. Back at the house, Lily noticed the change in her brother, too. "You seem different," she said one evening as they sat in June's living room. "More like before." Ghost pulled his sister close, kissing the top of her head. "Maybe I'm remembering who I used to be," he admitted. June worked from home when she could, using her laptop to catch up on paperwork while Lily helped her organize files. They developed their own quiet rhythm, making meals together, sharing stories, building trust in small moments. Ghost would watch them sometimes, his expression soft with wonder at how naturally June had created a space for healing. On the second night, as the extraction time drew closer, tension began creeping back in. Ghost doubled his security checks, and Lily grew more nervous, jumping at every car that passed by on the street. June found them both in the living room well past midnight, Ghost standing guard by the window, Lily fighting sleep on the couch. She brought them both cups of chamomile tea. "Try to rest," she told Lily, draping a soft blanket over her. "We're all here with you." Lily's eyes fluttered closed despite her fear, the exhaustion of the past few days finally catching up with her. Ghost watched his sister's sleeping face, his expression a mix of fierce protection and tender gratitude. "I never thought I'd see her sleep peacefully again," he whispered to June. "After everything, I didn't think we'd get here." June moved to stand beside him, their shoulders touching. "You never gave up on her," she reminded him. "That's why we're here now." Ghost turned to look at June, his eyes filled with emotion. "I gave up on myself," he admitted. "But you You never did, even when you learned the truth about me. Because I saw who you really were, June said simply. Behind all the masks and pretenses, I saw someone worth believing in. They stood together in the quiet darkness, watching over Lily as she slept. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, in this moment, they had created something precious, a sanctuary of trust and understanding, a place where healing could begin. Ghost's hand found June's in the darkness, their fingers intertwining. No words were needed as they maintained their vigil, united in their commitment to protect the sleeping girl on the couch and the fragile hope they had all found in each other. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Ghost's burner phone buzzed with the message he'd been desperately waiting for. His federal contact had finally reached out, but the news wasn't exactly what he'd hoped for. June found him on her back porch, his shoulders tense as he stared at the screen. "They can get us out," he said quietly, his voice rough. "But they need one more thing first: intelligence on the gang's latest operations. Without it..." He shook his head, crushing the phone in his grip. June stepped closer, placing her hand on his arm. "Then we'll find a way to get it. Together." Ghost turned to face her, his eyes haunted. "It's too dangerous. I can't risk..." "You're not alone anymore," June reminded him firmly. "We'll figure this out." The morning unfolded with a tense normalcy. June headed to the community center while Ghost stayed behind with Lily, maintaining their careful routine. But around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, June's phone rang. One of her co-workers was calling about Marco, a troubled 16-year-old who hadn't shown up for his usual afternoon session. "His mom says he left this morning talking about some easy money," her co-worker explained. "I'm worried, June. You know how the gangs have been recruiting lately." June's heart dropped. Marco was smart, but vulnerable, exactly the kind of kid the gang preyed on. She called Ghost immediately. "I think I know where they might have taken him," Ghost said, his voice grim. "The old warehouse district. It's where they test potential recruits." "I'm coming with you," June insisted, already grabbing her keys. "June." "He trusts me," she cut in. "If he's scared, he'll need a familiar face." They left Lily secured at the house with emergency protocols in place and headed out in June's car. Ghost directed her through a maze of industrial streets, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. The warehouse district was a collection of abandoned buildings, their walls covered in graffiti and their windows dark with grime. "There," Ghost pointed to a group of motorcycles parked behind one of the buildings. "That's where they'd bring him?" They parked a safe distance away and approached on foot. Ghost moved with the silent efficiency of his training, while June followed his lead. As they got closer, they could hear voices, rough laughter and what sounded like taunting. Ghost held up his hand, signaling June to wait. He crept forward to peer around the corner, then quickly moved back. "3 enforcers," he whispered. "They've got Marco cornered. They're making him prove himself." June's heart clenched. "How?" "Making him fight another kid. It's how they start the conditioning." Ghost's jaw tightened. "Stay here. When I create a distraction, get to Marco and get him out." Before June could protest, Ghost stepped out into view. His whole demeanor changed instantly, becoming the intimidating gang leader everyone feared. "What the hell is this?" His voice boomed across the space. The enforcers jumped to attention. "Boss, we were just testing fresh meat without clearing it with me first." Ghost stalked toward them, his presence radiating danger. "You know better than that." June used their distraction to slip around the other side. She found Marco pressed against the wall, his face bruised and his eyes wide with fear. Another young boy stood nearby, looking equally terrified. "Marco," she whispered. "Come on, honey, let's get you out of here." Marco's head snapped toward her voice. Relief flooded his face as he recognized her. June gestured urgently, and both boys crept toward her while Ghost kept the enforcers occupied with a thunderous lecture about chain of command. They had almost made it to safety when one of the enforcers spotted them. "Hey! Run!" Ghost shouted, suddenly dropping his act and shoving the nearest enforcer aside. They sprinted for June's car, Ghost covering their retreat. The enforcers were too stunned by their leader's betrayal to react quickly enough. By the time they recovered, Ghost had the car door open and was pushing the boys inside. June drove them away from the warehouse district as fast as she safely could. In the back seat, Marco finally broke down, sobbing into his hands. Some other boy, who introduced himself as Tommy, was shaking. "I'm sorry," Marco choked out between sobs. They said I could make enough money to help my mom with the bills. I didn't know." June reached back to squeeze his knee while keeping her eyes on the road. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." To everyone's surprise, it was Ghost who spoke next, his voice gentler than June had ever heard it. "You were trying to help your family," he said, turning in his seat to face Marco. "There's no shame in that, but there are better ways, safer ways. We'll help you find them." They dropped Tommy off first, making sure he got safely inside his house and had numbers to call if the gang tried to contact him again. Then they took Marco home, where Ghost spoke privately with his mother, while June helped Marco clean up his cuts and bruises. "I don't understand," Marco said quietly, as June applied antiseptic to his split lip. "Everyone says Ghost is dangerous, but he saved us. And he's different than what people say." June smiled softly. "People aren't always what others say they are. Sometimes they surprise you." By the time they returned home, it was early evening. Lily had dinner waiting, a simple pasta dish she'd learned to make from watching cooking videos online. The four of them gathered around June's small kitchen table, an unlikely family bound by circumstance and growing love. Marco was still subdued, but Ghost engaged him in conversation about his interests in computers, suggesting programs where he could learn coding. June watched as Marco gradually relaxed, responding to Ghost's genuine interest and gentle encouragement. "You know," Marco said between bites of pasta, "you'd make a really good youth counselor, Ghost. You get it, you know? What it's like to want to help your family so bad you'd do anything." Ghost's fork paused halfway to his mouth, emotion flickering across his face. June reached under the table to squeeze his knee, understanding how much those words meant to him. Lily smiled at her brother across the table. "He's always been good at taking care of people," she said softly, "even when we were kids." The conversation flowed easier after that, filled with quiet laughter and shared stories. Ghost seemed to relax more with each passing minute, as if allowing himself to believe in this moment of peace. When Marco's mother came to pick him up later, Ghost walked them to the door, giving Marco his personal number. "If you ever need someone to talk to," he said, "about anything, you call me, understand?" Marco nodded, then surprised everyone by hugging Ghost quickly before hurrying to his mother's car. Back inside, Ghost stood in the kitchen doorway, watching June and Lily clean up dinner. His expression was soft, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. "What is it?" June asked, noticing his gaze. "Just..." He gestured to the scene before him. The dirty dishes, the leftover pasta, the comfortable domesticity of it all. "I never thought I'd have this. Any of this, family. People who see past what I had to become." June set down her dishcloth and went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "This is who you really are," she whispered. "The man who saves lost boys and comforts his sister and brings food to veterans. That's the real you." Lily joined them, fitting herself into the embrace. For a long moment they stood together in the warm kitchen light, holding on to this precious moment of joy they had carved out of danger and fear. The morning sun cast long shadows across June's kitchen as Agent Ross's voice crackled through Ghost's secure phone. Extraction confirmed for Wednesday night at 2300 hours. Canyon location as discussed. No delays, no exceptions. Ghost's fingers tightened around the device. Understood. 3 passengers, clean exit. June watched from across the kitchen table, her coffee growing cold. Lily sat between them, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate. The teenager had barely touched her breakfast, but no one could blame her. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. "We need to pack light," Ghost said after ending the call. "1 backpack each, only essentials." His voice carried the weight of 8 years of running scenarios just like this one. "June, do you have dark clothes we can wear?" She nodded, already making mental lists. "I'll get everything ready. Lily, honey, we should go through your things from the center, too." They spent the morning in careful preparation. Ghost taught them both how to move silently, how to stay in shadows, how to respond if something went wrong. June's small backyard became their training ground as they practiced escape routes, through the side gate, past the shed, to the emergency meeting point 2 blocks away. "Remember," Ghost instructed, his hand gentle on Lily's shoulder, "if we get separated, you keep moving. Don't stop, don't look back. Agent Ross will have people watching all the extraction points." Lily's face was pale, but determined. "I won't let you down." "You never have," Ghost said softly, pulling her into a quick hug. Inside, June organized supplies. Water bottles, energy bars, basic first aid. Her hands moved automatically while her mind raced ahead to what came next. Witness protection, new names, new lives, starting over. The afternoon stretched into evening, each hour bringing them closer to freedom. After a simple dinner, Lily announced she was going to bed early. "I want to be rested," she said, trying to sound brave. They both hugged her tightly before she disappeared into the spare bedroom. Ghost and June found themselves on her back porch, the desert night spreading vast and star-filled above them. A gentle breeze carried the scent of creosote and sage. June's wind chimes tinkled softly. "Tell me what you're thinking," June said, curling into Ghost's side on the porch swing. He was quiet for a long moment, his arm warm around her shoulders. "I'm thinking about after, when we're safe, when we can be normal." "Normal sounds nice," June smiled. "What does normal look like to you?" "I've been watching you," he admitted. "At the center, with the kids, the way you connect with them, help them find their way." He paused, as if gathering courage. I think I'd like to do something like that. Work with troubled youth. Maybe use everything I've been through to help keep other kids from making the wrong choices." June's heart swelled. "You'd be amazing at it. I've seen how you are with them, with Marco, with all of them. They respond to you." "You think so?" There was such vulnerability in his voice. "I know so." She turned to face him, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingers. "You have so much good to give, Daniel. So much love." The use of his real name made him shiver. He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I love you," he whispered. "Whatever comes next, whatever we have to face, knowing you're with me makes it bearable." They kissed under the starlight, soft and slow, full of promise for the future they could almost touch. Later, June would remember this moment, their last perfect one. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Ghost and Lily left early for the youth center, planning to gather her belongings before the staff arrived. June stayed behind to finish packing, humming as she worked. Everything was falling into place. The sound of Ghost's motorcycle roaring into her driveway less than an hour later made her heart stop. He burst through the door alone, wild-eyed and breathing hard. "She's gone," he gasped. "The center, they broke in, destroyed everything." His legs gave out, and he sank to his knees in June's entryway. "They left a message. On my bike. Said you're next." June dropped to the floor beside him, pulling him into her arms as he began to shake. "We'll find her," she promised, even as fear clawed at her throat. "We'll get her back." "I can't lose her again," Ghost choked out. "I can't lose either of you. This is my fault, all of it." "No," June said firmly, holding him tighter. "This is not your fault. This is their fault. The men who took her, who forced you into this life, and we are going to get her back." But Ghost was beyond hearing, lost in a storm of grief and guilt, his perfect plan lying in ruins around them. June held him as he broke, her own tears falling silently into his hair, the morning sun casting long shadows across their huddled forms. The evening settled heavily around June's small house, the silence broken only by her soft breathing as she finally dozed on the couch. Hours of crying had left dark circles under her eyes, and even in sleep, her brow remained furrowed with worry. Ghost moved through the rooms like a shadow, his footsteps silent on the carpet. He paused to look at June, his heart clenching at the tear tracks still visible on her cheeks. She had fought so hard to stay, awake, to keep planning, but exhaustion had finally won. In their bedroom, he pulled his old federal badge from its hiding place behind a loose baseboard. The metal felt cold in his hands, a reminder of who he really was and what he had to do. He slipped it into the pocket of his leather jacket, along with the crumpled paper bearing the address where Viper had demanded to meet. At the kitchen table, Ghost's hands trembled as he wrote. The words came slowly, painfully. "My June, I can't let them hurt you. They've already taken so much, but they won't take you, too. I'm going to trade myself for Lily. It's the only way to keep you both safe. Please don't follow me. Please understand that everything I've done, every moment with you, has been real. You showed me who I really am again. I love you." He placed the note in the center of the kitchen table, where she would find it. For a moment, he stood in the doorway, watching June sleep. She looked so peaceful, so beautiful. The urge to wake her, to hold her one last time, was almost overwhelming. But he knew if he did, he'd never find the strength to leave. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and slipped out into the night. June stirred less than 15 minutes later, her hand reaching instinctively for Ghost. Finding only empty air, she sat up, heart already racing. "Daniel," she called out, voice rough from crying. The house remained silent. She stumbled to her feet, checking room after room with growing panic. When she reached the kitchen, the white paper on the table seemed to glow in the dim light. Her hands shook as she read his words, a fresh wave of tears blurring her vision. "No, no, no," she whispered, fumbling for her phone. She found Agent Ross's number, the federal contact Ghost had given her for emergencies, and pressed call. "He's gone," she gasped when Ross answered. "Ghost, Daniel. He's going to trade himself for Lily. You have to help him." "Stay calm, Mrs. Hayes." Ross's voice was steady. "We can track his phone. Give me 2 minutes." Those 2 minutes felt like years as June paced the kitchen, clutching Ghost's note to her chest. When her phone buzzed with a GPS coordinate, she was already grabbing her jacket. "Mrs. Hayes, wait for backup," Ross started to say. "There's no time," June cut him off. "Just keep tracking him. I'm going." She ran to her car, hands trembling so badly she could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and she backed out of the driveway fast enough to leave tire marks. The desert night stretched endless and dark before her as she sped down empty highways, following the blinking dot on her phone's screen. Streetlights grew scarce, then vanished entirely, leaving only her headlights to pierce the darkness. "Please," she whispered, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Please let me get there in time. Please keep him safe. Please don't let this be goodbye." The GPS led her deeper into the desert, away from any signs of civilization. Her old sedan rattled over rough roads, but she pressed harder on the accelerator. Nothing mattered except reaching Ghost before it was too late. She thought of his note, of his desperate attempt to protect her. Of course he would try to sacrifice himself. It was who he was, this man who had spent 8 years living a lie to protect others. But June refused to let him face this alone. They were married now, bound by more than just papers and promises. His battles were her battles. The moon hung low and orange on the horizon as June drove on, whispering prayers into the darkness, racing against time to save the man who had saved her heart. The headlights of June's sedan cut yellow beams through the darkness as she pulled into the abandoned scrapyard. Towering piles of crushed cars created metallic mountains against the starlit sky. Her heart stopped when she saw them, Ghost standing alone, hands raised in surrender, while a circle of leather-clad bikers pointed weapons at him. At their center stood a man she knew must be Viper, pressing a gun against Lily's temple. "Let her go," Ghost's voice carried across the yard. "You've got me. That's what you wanted." "Daniel, no!" June couldn't stop herself from crying out as she stepped from her car. Ghost's head whipped around, horror crossing his face. "June, get out of here, please!" But June kept walking forward, her steps steady despite her racing heart. The gang members shifted uneasily, clearly thrown by her presence. This wasn't part of their script. The scared wife wasn't supposed to show up. Viper's lips curved into a cruel smile. Well, the little woman comes to watch her husband die." "No," June said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I came to tell you that fear doesn't control us anymore." She took another step closer, ignoring Ghost's desperate attempts to wave her back. "This man you're threatening? He's saved more lives while pretending to be one of you than your entire gang ever has. He's helped kids escape the streets. He's protected people you tried to hurt." Her words seemed to make Viper hesitate for just a moment, and that moment was all that was needed. Suddenly, the night exploded with light and sound as federal agents emerged from their hidden positions in the surrounding hills. Red and blue lights flashed as armored vehicles rolled in from all directions. As gunfire erupted around them, June lunged forward, tackling Lily away from Viper's grip. They rolled behind a stack of crushed cars as bullets sparked off metal above them. Through the chaos, she saw agents rushing to Ghost, pulling him to safety as the gang members scattered under heavy fire. The federal agents moved quickly, shepherding Ghost, June, and Lily into an armored SUV. As they drove through the night, June held Lily's trembling hand, while Ghost kept his arm protectively around them both. Nobody spoke during the 30-minute drive to the safe house, a modest ranch-style home on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a high wall and security cameras. Inside, Agent Ross led them to a comfortable living room with soft couches and warm lighting. "You're safe now," he assured them, his normally stoic expression softening. "The gang's been completely dismantled. Viper and his top lieutenants are in custody." Once the initial bustle of agents settled down, leaving only 2 guards posted outside, Ghost finally allowed his carefully maintained control to crack. His shoulders began to shake as 8 years of tension, fear, and loneliness crashed over him at once. June wrapped her arms around him as he broke down, his tears soaking into her shoulder. "I'm so sorry," he whispered hoarsely, pulling back to look at her with red-rimmed eyes. "I never meant to put you in danger. You could have been killed because of me." June took his rough hands in hers, pressing gentle kisses to his knuckles. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "I chose to love you. I chose to stay when you told me the truth. I chose to help save Lily. Every step of the way, I made my own decisions." Ghost's breath caught as he stared at her, wonder and gratitude mixing with the tears in his eyes. Beside them on the couch, Lily curled up under a thick blanket an agent had provided, her head resting in June's lap. June stroked her hair softly as the teenager's eyes grew heavy with exhaustion. "You're safe now, sweetie," June murmured. "You can rest." Agent Ross returned with a folder, sitting across from them. "Daniel," he said quietly, using Ghost's real name for the first time in years, "we need to start the process of transitioning you out of your undercover identity. There's paperwork to file, new documents to create." Ghost nodded, his hand tightening around June's. "Daniel Hayes," he said, testing the sound of his own name. "I almost forgot what it felt like to be him." As Lily's breathing deepened into sleep, June squeezed his hand. "You never stopped being Daniel Hayes," she told him softly. "You just buried him deep to protect what mattered most." Looking at his sleeping sister and the woman who had helped save them both, Ghost, now Daniel again, felt the walls around his heart finally crumble completely. Here, in this quiet room with the two people he loved most in the world, he could finally begin to rebuild the life he'd lost 8 years ago. Not alone this time, but with the family he never expected to find. The small town of Cedar Grove welcomed spring with open arms, its tree-lined streets and friendly faces offering the perfect fresh start. 2 weeks had passed since their arrival in witness protection, and the new life was already feeling wonderfully normal. The youth center sat in the heart of town, a renovated brick building with large windows and a welcoming courtyard. Inside, Daniel, no longer known as Ghost, worked alongside June, their shared passion for helping troubled youth creating something special. Teens gathered around him during breaks, drawn to his quiet strength and understanding. When he shared carefully edited versions of his own struggles, they listened with rapt attention, seeing hope in his story of redemption. The local veterans became regular visitors, bringing homemade cookies and wisdom to share. They particularly loved watching Daniel teach self-defense classes, commenting on his patience and gentle instruction. "That young man," Mrs. Henderson from the veterans' home would say, "has an old soul and a kind heart." Lily blossomed in this new environment. Her therapist reported steady progress, and she threw herself into helping June organize community events. Her natural talent for art transformed the center's bulletin boards into colorful displays that made everyone smile. One evening, after the last teenagers had gone home and the center grew quiet, Daniel took June's hand. "Come with me," he said softly, leading her to their favorite spot, a wooden bench nestled under flowering trees in the courtyard. The setting sun painted everything in warm gold. His hands trembled slightly as he knelt before her, holding out a familiar silver ring, the same one she'd given him months ago when she married the man known as Ghost. His eyes, clear and full of love, met hers. "You married a ghost," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Now I want you to marry the man. The real me, without any shadows or secrets between us." June's eyes filled with happy tears as she nodded, pulling him close as he slipped the ring onto her finger. They held each other in the fading sunlight, their hard-won peace finally complete. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed, I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.